Howdy, all you guys and gals out there. You're listening to Watchman Radio. We're starting off the week playing a little bluegrass. The name of that little tune is called Happy Bluegrass, number 3. Did you know that there is such a thing as bluegrass? It's not just a name for a genre of country music. If you've ever had the opportunity of driving through the state of Kentucky, you'll see some pastures with horses grazing, but the grass is not green. It's more turquoise, and they call it bluegrass. Kentucky, Tennessee are very beautiful states. If you ever have the chance to take a drive or visit for any length of time, I highly recommend it. Well, now that you're in a good mood, let's consider the daily text. Monday, January 14. Discipline is painful. Hebrews 12:11. And here is the Watchtower's comment. Despite our pain of heart, we must avoid normal contact with a disfellowshipped family member by telephone, text messages, letters, emails, or social media. Yet maintain hope. Love hopes all things, including that those who have left Jehovah will come back to him. If you see evidence that a close family member is having a change of heart, you could pray that he or she gain strength from the scriptures and respond to Jehovah's appeal, return to me. Jesus said that if we were to put any human before him, we would not be worthy of him. Yet he was confident that his disciples would have the courage to maintain their loyalty to him despite family opposition. If following Jesus has brought a sword into your family, rely on Jehovah to help you deal with the challenges successfully. Find joy in knowing that Jehovah and Jesus are pleased with you and that they will reward your faithful course. Okay, well, there is so much wrong with this daily text. I don't know where to begin. I mean, the Watchtower is, well, they're accused of being a cult, that's for sure. And they betray themselves as being that very thing by this sort of mind control. Why not leave it up to each individual to determine the extent of the relationship they will have with a family member that is disfellowshipped? For one thing, being disfellowshipped does not dissolve a marriage, does it? Husband and wife one may be disfellowshipped, one may not. Brothers and sisters, other family members, being disfellowshipped does not dissolve those familiar relationships. But here the society is saying, don't talk to them on the telephone, don't text them, don't interchange with them on social media, obviously Facebook. And then there is the matter of what actually constitutes a disfellowshipping offense. Being put out of the congregation, it is a scriptural arrangement, if you want to call it that. Jesus said, if a person does not listen to the congregation, let them be to you as a tax collector or a person of the nations. And of course, the Jews had no dealings with people of the nations. But the Apostle Paul, he encouraged the Corinthians to act as judges in the case of a man who was living in an extremely immoral situation. And Paul said, what, do you not know that unrighteous persons will not inherit God's kingdom? And then he listed those who are sexually immoral, idolaters, adulterers, men who submit to homosexual acts, men who are thieves, greedy people, drunkards, revilers, and extortioners. So that's some pretty vile things. How about someone who, let's say they celebrate their birthday, or let's say they take a blood transfusion, or let's say that they smoke cigarettes. Do you see any of those things listed? Would a person that smokes cigarettes be considered immoral? Would he be the same as a homosexual or a thief or a drunkard or a reviler? That's not to say that smoking is not an unclean habit. Of course it is. And at one time, the Watchtower allowed persons who smoked to become baptized, and apparently a brother could not be appointed as a ministerial servant or elder if he was a smoker. But then back around 1973, the Watchtower said, well, you smokers have 6 months to quit, or you're going to be put out of the congregation. And some were disfellowshipped. I knew an individual that was disfellowshipped, and it caused quite a bit of heartache in his family. So where is the justification for treating people as if they were immoral, extortioners, and homosexuals because they smoke a cigarette, for example, or take a blood transfusion? Is this not a case of the Watchtower going beyond what is written, establishing its own criteria? Also, something that doesn't really sit well, and I'm sure many of you feel the same way, this suggestion that we have to hold out hope for those who have left Jehovah to come back. Are all those who have left the organization, have they left Jehovah? Does no longer being a part of the Watchtower mean that God has cut you off? I certainly don't believe that. I believe I have evidence that my relationship with Jehovah is intact. And I was disfellowshipped, 13 years ago. And how about those who have willingly disassociated themselves? Are they to be viewed as drunkards and homosexuals and unrepentant sinners simply because they may no longer wish to be known as one of Jehovah's Witnesses? How many of Jehovah's Witnesses have become so disgusted with the Watchtower that they simply wanted no part of it? I can tell you it's a lot. But here the Watchtower is saying that they've left Jehovah and you must punish them. If you have a family member who has left the organization in disgust, you must punish them by not speaking to them. If you have children, you shouldn't let your children see a family member who has willingly left the Watchtower, even if they're not immoral, even if they do not speak against Jehovah, even if they still believe the truth of the Bible and have faith. If they leave the Watchtower, they are an enemy. And that, my friends, is cult-like behavior. And people that, for example, in Scientology, they are not allowed to leave. If they leave, they are punished. And that's exactly what the Watchtower does here. They punish those who leave the Watchtower, claiming that they've left Jehovah. And I know many of you have left the organization, but I know you've not left Jehovah. You've not abandoned your faith. You're waiting on God to do what he says he's going to do, which is bring about discipline. And the theme scripture that the Watchtower uses, taken from Hebrews 12:11, where Paul said, "True, no discipline seems for the present to be joyous, but it is painful. Yet afterward it yields the peaceable fruit of righteousness to those who've been trained by it." So the Watchtower is implying that we are disciplining people who have left the Watchtower. But how does not associating with one who has disassociated themselves, how is that disciplining them? How is that training them in righteousness? No, it's punishment. It's punishment. And that, my friends, is immoral. It's wrong. Well, Jehovah is going to bring discipline upon everyone, but especially upon the leaders of the Watchtower Society. I've mentioned it before, but in the 12th chapter of Luke, Jesus went into much more detail about the faithful slave and how there is also an evil slave, and both slaves are punished. The one slave who acted out of ignorance is punished with a few strokes. The other slave who willfully disobeyed the master, he is punished with many strokes and put out. But there is punishment coming. There is discipline coming. A few strokes is going to hurt. Believe me. If you got lashed with a whip, just 2 or 3 times, you would feel it for a long time. Well, Bible prophecy has a lot to say about this. I mentioned in the other program that the Watchtower has published a new commentary on Ezekiel with the audacious title of Pure Worship Restored at Last. All the prophets, though, not just Ezekiel, but they all reveal the same pattern, that Jehovah brings about a painful wrecking work, a destruction, and afterwards comes a restoration. And the destruction serves as discipline. And then God brings the blessing. And Ezekiel, as I say, is no different. But in the 36th chapter, this is post-destruction. And God subjects his people to the ridicule of the nations. And it is interesting that the accusation of those against God's people, well, in verse 13, this is people outside saying, "You are a land that devours people and bereaves your nations of children." Well, what does that mean? Well, I believe it specifically addresses this situation, that the Watchtower devours its own people for various reasons as listed. Basically, if you do not give glory and honor to the Watchtower, you will be punished. I'll get back to this scripture in a minute, but I want to just illustrate the point. I've known a number of people who have been disfellowshipped for merely mentioning my website. A number of years ago, someone who had emailed me, he printed out an essay I had written on paradise, imagining paradise. And I tried to get people to use their imagination, to put themselves in the new world and imagine what they could do with limitless possibilities and everlasting life before them. Because someone had written me saying, is it really going to be, it sounds like it might be boring. And so I responded to that. And this brother printed this essay out and gave it to a person who was very discouraged and despondent. And that person took the essay to the elders, and they brought this brother before a judicial committee, and they disfellowshipped him. And the reason was because I said at the onset, forget about the Watchtower's crude drawings of people sitting around petting lions with picnic baskets. The new world is much more than that, and you can tap into it with your imagination. Something like that. But because I said, forget the Watchtower's crude drawings, that was considered a blasphemous statement. But of course it's true. How could any artist possibly capture the beauty and peace of a world where no one has been? It's only through our imagination, through with the help of the Bible. But he was disfellowshipped. After a year or so, he was reinstated. But you can multiply that many times over. I remember when I first went online about that same time, it was probably around 2002, 2003, a sister contacted me, and her mother had developed Alzheimer's. And she was just recently baptized, the mother, and then developed this terrible disease, and she ended up in a nursing home. And she was befriended in the nursing home by, I think she was a Baptist or something. And during this time, the sister begged the elders to go make a shepherding call on her mother. They never did. She asked them several times, please visit my mother. And she's so alone and despondent and cut off from congregation. No shepherding call. But her companion in the nursing home invited this sister to go to her church. And it happened to be her former religion anyway, before she became one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So she accepted and went to church. Well, guess what? The elders heard of it, and then they came a-knocking. Then they made their shepherding call, but it was with a judicial committee to disfellowship this elderly sister with Alzheimer's who had just been baptized. And as a result, she died shortly thereafter, and not a soul came to her funeral. Well, there's a lot of other stories like that. They're terrible. Back to this scripture in Ezekiel. You are a land, or we could substitute organization. You are an organization that devours people and bereaves your people of children. Does that make more sense now? Why does the Watchtower baptize 8- and 9-year-olds? I think they're younger than that now sometimes. You're not old enough to make adult decisions. You can't do a lot of things, but yet you're old enough to make this life-pivoting decision to be baptized. And then when the children reach teenage years and the desires incidental to youth kick in, and then they're disfellowshipped at a tender, fragile time in their life when they need family and friends and support. They're kicked out. You are an organization that devours people and bereaves your families of children. Jehovah goes on, therefore, you will no longer devour people or make your nations childless, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. So God is not saying that these accusations are false. Just as in Revelation, Satan is called the accuser of our brothers who accuses them night and day. It doesn't say those accusations are false. They're more than likely true. So Jehovah's going to address this situation. God, as the Watchtower notes in the scripture, he is a disciplinarian. He disciplines us because he loves us. And sometimes the discipline is going to be very, very grievous and painful. So God goes on in that 15th verse. He says, I will not subject you to any more insults of the nations or make you bear the taunts of people. And you will no longer cause your nations to stumble, declares the sovereign Lord Jehovah. Well, what does it mean, causing your nations to stumble? Nations or peoples. The Watchtower has a presence in most nations of the world. Ethnic groups of all kinds are part of this organization. And as Jesus said, many will be stumbled. It's not talking about people that are unbelievers. How can you stumble someone who's not even walking on the road to life? No, the Watchtower stumbles people. They have stumbled millions of people that are Jehovah's Witnesses, and many millions more who have casual contact, who maybe have studied. Many millions of people have studied or have relatives that are Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're familiar with some of the teachings, and they may be interested, but then they see all of this misdoing, and they see the Watchtower's hypocrisy. They've stumbled many. And Jehovah says, you will no longer cause your nations to stumble. Well, how is he going to fix that? Again, it's going to be very, very painful. But it has to do with Christ coming. Remember in Malachi, the 3rd chapter, Christ is coming with the fire of a refiner and the lie of a laundryman. So, verse 17, it says, Son of man, when the house of Israel was dwelling in their land, they made it unclean by their way and their dealings. Their ways were like the uncleanness of menstruation to me. So I poured out my rage on them. That's the discipline. That's the fire. And verse 20 goes on to say, but when they came to those nations, people profaned my holy name by saying about them, these are the people of Jehovah. But they had to leave his land. So I will show concern for my holy name, which the house of Israel profaned among the nations where they have gone. What you may not appreciate, of course, in the typical fulfillment, the Jews were drug off their homeland. They had profaned the name of Jehovah. And because that Jehovah was compelled by their unfaithfulness to destroy the city where he had placed his name and his own temple, nations ridiculed Jehovah. They profaned God's name by saying, look, God had to destroy his own nation. His people were so wicked. So Jehovah says he will show concern for his holy name. Not for your sakes, he said, am I acting, O house of Israel, but for my holy name, which you profaned among the nations where you have gone. Well, the Watchtower boasts regularly how we've gotten out of Babylon the Great. But that just ain't so. Jehovah's Witnesses are going into captivity to Babylon the Great. That doesn't mean you start believing teachings like the Trinity and all that kind of nonsense. The Jews that went to Babylon didn't necessarily take up the worship of the Babylonian gods. Daniel and the three Hebrews were exemplary in that regard. But think about this. Jehovah's Witnesses bear the name of God before the world. The religions of Christendom, they may refer to God once in a while as Yahweh or something like that. But Jehovah's Witnesses are really inseparable with the name of God. It's the name of the religion. And of course, it's pronounced differently in whatever language, but the point is the God of the Bible, whose name is YHWH, we pronounce it Jehovah. When people hear the name Jehovah, who do they think of? Jehovah's Witnesses. And the leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses have unquestionably profaned the name of Jehovah. And it's going to get worse because God is going to be forced to bring discipline and punishment. And people will profane the name of God for that very reason. And God will have to sanctify his name. And they will have to know that he is Jehovah. See how that works? But first comes the discipline for all of these atrocities that the Watchtower has perpetrated in the name of Jehovah. Well, let's play a little more Bluegrass and try to think some happy thoughts. In the news, I tweeted a short while ago that Vladimir Putin has authorized the deployment of 30 nuclear submarines, drones, nuclear drones. What are these exactly? They are nuclear-powered drones. They're not manned. They're like aerial drones, only they're underwater. And they are attached to large submarines. The drones themselves are about 80 feet long. They are powered by miniature nuclear reactors, so they can go really, really fast underwater. But they also carry nuclear warheads that will detonate at a target underwater. They're designed to go into harbors where there are Navy bases, or they could be used. The thing that makes these weapons so terrifying. When they come into shore, like 100 miles an hour, and detonate, they will create a tsunami wall over 1,500 feet high. You could detonate one in New York Harbor, for example, and just completely wash out Manhattan. You could detonate one under a fleet of naval ships and aircraft carriers and obliterate them. These drones are equipped with stealth technology so that the sensors that are planted all over the world's oceans that the military strategists use to detect submarines, they cannot detect these drones. And the drones can travel underwater for thousands of miles. They have a range of 6,000 miles. And they can travel like 3,000 feet under the ocean. They're completely undetectable. They're doomsday weapons. Russia has just ordered these weapons to be deployed because they know what's coming. They know this dying British Empire and its Wall Street affiliate are not going to go quietly into the night. They've been pumping this thing up for the last 10 years with funny money, and it's starting to come unraveled. PG&E, California's big energy provider, they're tanking. Their stock is tanked, and their bonds are downgraded to junk. They're going to declare bankruptcy. Zero Hedge poses the question, is this another AIG? And if you recall, in 2008, AIG, big insurance company, they had all these derivative contracts, which they were underwater on, and it was going to bring the whole system down. When Wall Street closed on Friday, they were saying it may not open on Monday. And they held emergency meetings, blah, blah, blah. And they pumped trillions and trillions and trillions into the banking system, and everything is good. And now we're back to where we were in 2007. Only this crash is going to be much, much worse. London knows it, and they're trying to foment a war. The defense minister in Britain, this guy, he's never held a military office. He says that they're going to deploy their military forces to the Arctic to confront Russia. Do you know how long it would take for Russia to destroy England? It would be a matter of hours. The city of London could be reduced to an ash heap. By the way, Vladimir Putin has been building bomb shelters in Russia for quite a few years. It is believed that there are provisions for the entire population of Moscow in bomb shelters. Do you have a bomb shelter? The leaders of the United States and Britain and France are angling for war with Russia. Do you think you're going to be an idle bystander when the nukes start flying? It's insanity. Who's behind it? Well, Jehovah is. Jehovah is behind it. Just as he used Babylon as his weapon to discipline those who profaned his name. Do you see how this works? So it is Jehovah's great military force that he is assembling to take care of business. Well, I've gone on here long enough, but let's play another happy tune, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.